All right. Well, thanks guys for this third or fourth or fifth or sixth edition of the Wise Crowd's Liberating Structures design call. Our goal today is to help somebody by prototyping a string of liberating structures in response to their help request, ergo design call. And we'll be doing that broadly with two structures, Wise Crowds and with design storyboards. And you guys have all got a link in the chat to the design storyboard doc that we'll be working with. To start off, just to introduce everybody and get all warmed up, I propose we'll do a round of impromptu networking. So that'll be 3 brief conversations, one-on-one in variety. And our invitation is I'm still curious about structures we'd like to get to know better. So what is a structure you hope that we take the opportunity to unpack at some point today? Let's go like so. I guess we only need one breakout room, right? Let's see, let's open a room and let's assign somebody hang out with me. And I guess I will, the timer's going, so, all right. I guess I broke it. You guys.
There we go. It's better.
Awesome. So time is running. Sorry about that. It'll be brief. Deal with it.
Am I going?
I don't know.
Okay.
No, you're here. Awesome, David.
Okay.
So any structures you'd like to get to know today?
It probably isn't the ones that I haven't tried really, because my environment doesn't let me do it, even though they say they value the things that they exemplify, is heard, seen, and respected, and Triz. I can't get Triz through the door because they don't like to talk about anything that could be conceived of as negative.
Oh yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I can definitely relate to that.
It's like self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, they're like, well, why would you talk about something negative? And I'm like, well, why would you ever admit you have a problem?
Yeah, exactly.
How would you ever learn anything?
Yeah. Maybe you have a problem. But heard, seen, respected, that's such an interesting sort of polarity, right? Because I would say if you were afraid, so to speak, of going down the Triz rabbit hole, I would imagine that heard, seen, respected would be actually exactly the type of vibe that you would want to get into, right? But it does have a similar vein, right? This idea of tell a story about a time when it didn't go so well, like that's vulnerable territory, right?
Yeah, although the heard, seen, respected, it's personal. Triz, it's kind of future projection, right?
Yeah.
Like if we wanted to fail, what would we do? Why would we able to do that?
Exactly, the imaginal space. But yeah, so I can imagine, right, that sort of confronted with that invitation, tell a story. So heard, seen, respected, right? For anybody watching later, tell a story about a time when you didn't feel heard, seen, and respected in pairs. And if I didn't feel particularly great in my context or with my peers, then there is this moment of like, tell a story about something that maybe still is a little right? Has got some
probably not about the people you're with too, because that's like even more, that's like being gently confrontational.
Yeah, exactly, right. Hey,
remember that radical candor would suggest that you should do that. You should tell the truth about something that happened.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the trick with that is that it's also the opportunity space for resolution, right? You got to speak about it before we could get in right relationship and get to come to terms with the fact that, hey, actually, yeah, that time didn't go so good, and I'm still kind of hurt about it. And, you know, and we can go through all of the normal human stuff around, oh, well, that was not my intention and my bad. I'm for being clumsy with you.
That's the interesting thing, though, is the self-criticality is people, if you don't have an environment where it's trusting, where you are heard, seen, and respected, then it's really hard to reveal stuff.
No doubt.
I think for people, I think that's part of the culture, you know, in lots of organizations.
Yeah, so there's for sure. That's why I like the practice of circling. It's, you know, not exactly a liberating structure. It falls more into the category of these authentic relating games, right? Just
Yeah.
this continuously going back and forth with effectively the equivalent of I notice. This is what I notice now. This is what I notice now. That not only the practice of noticing, but also revealing what I notice to another person. I don't know. We've definitely done it at the dojo before, just this continuous round of being here with you, I feel. And there's some intense feels that can come up in the context of that. And I just love that moment of like, ooh, all right, now that I've noticed, am I going to say it? Like, all right, just lean all the way in there.
That's me too, isn't it, really?
Awesome, gentlemen. Well, Aaron, Elvin, now you guys know each other.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's do it again. And I would say, how to open all rooms? I guess that's the way. Who wants to hang out with me?
I'll go.
Aaron or Elvin? Elvin, you're hanging
I
out.
can, yeah. Okay.
Awesome.
I can join.
Cool. Let's jam. So, man, is there any structure you think you want to? Oh, wait. Oh, no. Elvin, get back here. Yes. Oops. What happened? Did I lose Elvin? Uh-oh. Oh, no. I put him in limbo? Oh, crap. Well, that's a good thing I'm not recording this for the internet. Yeah. Well, fail fast. Let me figure out what happened. I lost Elvin.
I messed
Hey,
up. I
hey,
left
Elvin.
the room. Yeah. And I
Welcome back.
realized I left.
You left the call, right? Yeah, exactly. There. Curiously, bad user experience. As a feedback to anybody at Zoom, those buttons are very close to each other, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe different colors or something. You know, bigger
Yeah.
targets. So, man, is there any structure you'd like to become better friends with?
Yeah. So I just saw the Trica Consulting, and I've already used the 124 or I've used the 5 Ys, and I've used the 15% solutions. I just read them on the website, and I was able to do it with my team.
Oh, right.
I mean, my company. So like it was like just read and apply it, and it went really well because it was in the phase where we had to do problem solving activities and also team building activities and ideas and brainstorming sessions. So I just feel like, well, 124 seemed really good for people who are not verbal to be verbal with just 2 people, to be verbal with 4 people, and then they can keep quiet when it gets all. So
yeah, exactly, right. You know, what I like about
really
that
good.
pattern especially is that, you know, if that nonverbal person has been verbal with me, like you can be damn sure I'm going to help them be nonverbal when it comes to 4. Because you know, anybody got anything? I'm always yes. Oh man, he said something so smart. I'm going to tell everybody.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm thinking of trying to learn more about the Trica Consulting and
Cool.
probably the Triz. Any of the
Trica and
2.
Triz. Yep.
Yeah.
I think Triz is, how can you just not love Triz, right? Inviting people to come into this space of, I mean, for the space of the pre-mortem, right?
Mhm.
Looking back from the future, so to speak, or or intentionally trying to fuck some shit up.
Mhm.
But Troika's interesting as far as a setting. I mean, if you're talking about team building, there's a pretty no-brainer opportunity. There's a string of structures that I've had continuous good luck with for team building, which is appreciative interviews, Troika consulting, and then 15% solutions.
Mm.
It's about an hour and a half, so 90 minutes long. And by the end of that, so I mean, the basic invitation is, appreciative interviews, tell a story about a time when you were on a great team, right?
Mhm.
And you do that in one-on-ones, and in 30 minutes, you have collected a lot of good criteria for what your team that you're now in may want to sort of hold on to.
Yeah.
And then Troika is that good additional aspect of, give and get held. That's always a bonding experience generally, right? Because that requires me to, expose some of myself to you, and, also receive your wisdom, so to speak, in response to that struggle. And then 15% solutions, that, last baby step. So, all right, how might I be able to make use of that information? So that, bam, boom. Maybe I'm trying to do too much too fast.
Good.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
I still have, I still have two. Improv prototyping and Panarchy. That's my two. And let's
Yeah,
do this.
Panarchy, good. I like that one too.
Yeah.
Let's see this recreate thing. Recreate, run breakout room with some time. Open the room. And Aaron, if you want to kick it with me.
Sure, absolutely. I clicked last time and then it just, maybe someone beat me to that. I don't know, because I clicked, because it had your name come up, and then I clicked that and so.
It went somewhere. No worries.
Well, no, with the David. So yeah, which is fine.
We'll complete the cycle.
Right.
So is there any structure that you're geeked out that you'd like to get to know?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some, when you get in the deeper end of the pool. So, because I use this, I think I've told you this, like I'm running a group at my company, and I'm not running a group just as like, yay, let's go learn LS. I mean, it's like a purposeful, and nothing against that. I'm not against like go team, rah. That's fine. But this is part of sort of an innovation. There's an innovation group and a sales and competitiveness group, like group that we do things in the company. And I bridge those two because I'm in both of those groups. I'm basically like the deputy head-ish, like maybe number 3 in the sales competitiveness group and number 2 in the innovation group, 2.5, whatever.
So you've got some content around which you can organize
And they
that
both struggle with each other, not like against each other, but they both sort of stumble because they're each speaking to a different part of the customer centricity value stream, right? If that makes any sense, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to bridge that by pulling a bunch of this stuff together. So I built and a lot of the people there are very facilitation friendly. Obviously, they're more senior, et cetera. So we have this sort of strike group of, sort of the joint innovation team. And I sort of slammed LS into the group the last 3 months or so. And we do it. I mean, like we do it as a team in ourselves, right? Like, how do we organize agendas for meetings for the other people that are part of these groups, right? Which is, big 15, 20, 30 people are part of each of these groups. So they, so those things can get unwieldy and very top down PowerPoint half-ass after a while, where people are not even, while they're checking their email. Right. And so, yeah, I'll do that with my account too. Right. Which is like, you'll do nothing, right? You'll forward an email that no one will read. Right. So we try to flip this. So one of the things I've been trying to get to are things like agreement and certainty matrix, right? Like this hard shit, right? Like when you're talking about these kind of groups, because it, it's like like I always tell people, anything that you're complaining about are people stuck in circumstances which are not easy, because all the easy decisions are made. Right. So it's easy to scream about your prime minister, your foreign minister, your president. They should just do this, buy this cord and you solve the Russia-Ukraine problem. Right. It's like, can't they see that? I'm like, yeah, dude, no offense, but, these are people who, basically spent, 28 years in some academic hellhole of studying like 700 classes in international relations, read every book, and they still can't get shit done, which that tells you they're not stupid. That tells you this is really
punched
hard.
in the face by reality, right?
Yeah, Mike Tyson wakes up every day ahead of you and is saying, ha ha ha, I'm between you and the bathroom door, between you and the kitchen, and every door until you go to sleep. And then everyone else goes to the meeting saying, Mike is there at the door. How come he's at my door? And it's just like we're in a horror movie of Mike Tyson. By the way, that would be a funny little comic thing to do.
I like that. That's a nice skit.
Yeah, and so, but so there's our little mini "we don't matter in the world" kind of version of that, which is how does our salespeople, I don't mean salespeople, how do our account leaders and our vertical and global leaders who are really managing our relationships with our top, let's say 50, 100 accounts, how can we be relevant in a world where there's a lot of competition and everyone's got something to say? And then our innovation groups who can, organically just go off and do quote unquote innovation because it's cool shit. Let's glue a Raspberry Pi to a China cabinet and play records, right? I mean, just random shit, and that's what they do. And by the way, there's always some discovery in there. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do like the Google thing. 20% of your time shouldn't be that stuff. It should be, but 80% of your time shouldn't be. Like 80% of your time should be working on this value-centric, aligned stuff to your customer. And so pulling those two together, which really means they have different incentives, different language, and that's the challenge, basically.
Yeah,
so
totally.
Does that make sense?
I think that sounds interesting. I think there's a good use case for agreement certainty matrix. Looks like we got a new joiner. Let's throw them into the mix. They're going to be cold. We'll be nice to them. Should be interesting. So we're going to work through the doc. Before we do that, actually, I want to take this opportunity to invite everybody. Angel, what's up?
Hi, sorry for the delay.
You just missed our impromptu networking, so it means you're a little colder and a little staler than the rest of us, but you're definitely welcome. So let me drop the link to the doc that we're working from in the chat. And what we're about to do is talk about where we are in the sort of development phases of liberating structures proficiency. So on the second or third or fourth page in the doc, you'll find an image, which is the growth ladder for liberating structures. And what I'd invite you to do is to add where you are in that growth ladder after your name in the video.
Okay, so I'm looking at your doc. I'm sorry, and it's just so there's hygiene, dad, Winfrey. Yep. Where do you want us to be? I'm missing maybe that piece here. Like, where's
I think it's on page 3 or so. If I have the right doc, I hope so.
Oh, yes. Where are you on the journey? Okay, my bad. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Okay, I just realized that.
And then, so just take a minute and do your self-evaluation. And the reason that we want to do this is we want to use this development phase to invite ourselves into taking up a particularly handy membership role for this call, for the purposes of this call. So for anybody, if there's anybody in the call that finds themselves at the despairing cynic that just is brand spanking new, doesn't know hardly anything about liberating structures, use that relative ignorance to our advantage by helping us challenge our own orthodoxy and assumptions. So ask the hard question of like, well, why should that work? Or bring up an alternative. If you're in the phase of a cautious optimist, if you're familiar with using, say, plus or minus 5 liberating structures, then the invitation for you is to help us to avoid being presumptive and make sure that you ask the clarifying question and explanation to us. So if a structure gets brought up, help point it out to us and say, hey, how does that one work again? For those of you in the super user category that are familiar with plus or minus 15 structures, then help us by answering questions that you haven't answered before, so that even if you're not sure if your answer is going to be good enough or right enough, just give it a try for the first time and we'll help out. And for the minimalist of us on the call, the invitation is to help make space for other contributors. So practice a bit of patience and build on the input of others so that we can give these super users and those less familiar the opportunity to practice articulating how these things work. So with that being said,
yeah, being a beginner, I don't think I'm a minimalist. So what do I choose? Because I'm pretty new to this. I've used it before, but
no worries. Like I said, man, everybody's got a job that can help out the group, regardless of where you're at on the growth hierarchy.
yeah.
So just lean into that job and we'll have a super awesome call.
Okay.
And we lose Aaron. Where's the cat acting up? Still on the call.
No, I'm still here. I'm just getting my tea. I'm sorry. I just didn't want
No.
you to have to see me running around real quick back and forth.
No worries, man. It's all good. So with that part sort of out of the way, then we're going to move into the nuts and bolts of the design call. And for that, we're going to make use of the liberating structure wise crowds. And wise crowds, you can find the sort of template, I think, down. Actually, where did the wise crowds template go? Did it get deleted? Or is it just not loading? At any rate, wise crowds will work. Before I jump in, let me follow my own guidance. Is there anybody familiar with wise crowds that wants to maybe try and explain the structure to us?
I don't think I'm familiar enough.
No, no worries. David, can I throw you in on this?
Yeah, I'm looking at the description now. There's a rhythm between the wisdom of the crowd and the need of the person who brings a challenge. And I'm just, it's not a recipe exactly. It's more like a time structure.
I guess I'm going to jump in here and add the explainer to it.
Yeah, that's where I'm going. Things are running a little bit slow. Like many of the structures,
Sorry.
it asks you to be articulate in bringing a challenge and asking for insight or assistance. And you're, in a professional sense, you're basically acting like micro consultant. You're looking for consultation if you're the bringer, or you're looking to consult if you're the consultant.
Yeah.
And the idea is
Exactly.
that everybody participates. There's not really necessarily an observer. Like that might be something that separates a little bit from Troika, I think. So then the idea is that you articulate your problem, your challenge, your opportunity, your risk, and then you take some clarifying questions. And then when the situation is clear, you turn your back or you turn your mic off, you turn your camera off, you become non-present, and you listen to people discussing their reaction to what you presented. And what you're learning from that is how well you presented your challenge, how well you've thought it through, how well you can articulate it, how much nuance you bring. And what other people are learning is how to move an idea around and look at it from different points of view and try to provide something of value in a relatively short period of time. Sometimes curiosity is enough. Other times there's experience that you draw on and it comes back out. And then,
Yeah, and it's also about the patterns too, about self-discovery around any patterns you might have. That's what I can remember experiencing too.
and then I think that when you come back, as you do in Troika also, we turn your camera back on. And I don't think there's really a time signature for when that happens. Depends on the format and how long it's valuable. But when you come back, then you say what you heard that resonated and what might be useful. And you generally try to express gratitude for the energy that people have put into examining your situation. And then you generally feel somewhat elated because people you don't know your problem, have contributed something that you hadn't thought of, which is always valuable.
For
Is that
sure.
good audit, Jeremy?
Insightful.
Is that what you're
That's
thinking?
rad. That's cool. That's definitely
That's
different
awesome.
than how I explain it. So we've got some variety. We're adapting. So yeah, that's the basic pattern, right? Similar to Troika. Aaron, you said that you've got a design brief for us to work on.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I can present this right now. Is that okay? Like this is like the real world question stuff. So let me make sure there's nothing here that's yep, nothing here is impactful from a business standpoint. So if I can share the screen, let me do this. Let me know when you guys see it. Oh, disabled screen sharing. Okay, that's weird. It says every time I click screen share.
You're a co-host
Okay.
now, so you
Oh,
should
now
be
I'm
able to.
co-host. Okay, cool. Let me tell me when you can see my screen.
It
There
has
it
started.
is.
Yep.
Okay, you can see it. Okay, let me minimize this and then. So let me give you the quick backgrounder. So we have a governance team, like IT governance, and even bigger than IT governance. They can do lots of forms of governance for our clients. It's all everything I'm talking about here is client facing. Like nothing is internal operation centric. So it's all whatever we would engage with our clients in. And one of the things we're attempting to do is help the governance team evolve their sort of understanding around things like digital governance. So they need to, when you're doing things like agile digital transformation with clients, there's an evolution from traditional sort of IT governance or almost compliance governance, if that makes any sense, to a much more dynamic version of it, where you are constantly validating if your governance is meeting your clients, like clients to clients, right? Like clients' needs, like along the value stream. So, you know, the things that they support now are very contract management, risk management, et cetera, things like that, which are, you know, sort of traditional legacy governance. And that's fine and that's good. But when it comes to things like Agile, that's not what they're doing. So the questions would be for a workshop that we're looking to organize is, what personal growth would you like to achieve by being part of this sort of governance innovation team? That's how we're sort of defining it. And then how do you see yourself in a relationship to the need to adapt to the Agile development projects that would come from it, right? So it's sort of taking additional responsibility that isn't normally there, because you have, you know, Scrum Masters and product owners and things like that. But when you have a bunch of these, you know, a bunch of pods in a client, you have to have some kind of macro governance model. And most clients are doing some, you know, nuclear safe program and, you know, all that, right? Like they're not bought into that, right? They want to do very tactical Agile projects or programs or pods. And then they want sort of kind of a semi-traditional layer between them and those pods. And that's where the governance team comes in. Does that make sense? Or did I lose you?
No, there's just a lot to parse.
Yes, so we don't have
I-
to answer everything. I mean, so that it's don't worry about that. Just point. I
Can
just want to
I,
give you the whole problem.
Can I
Sure.
attempt to reflect this and see if I understood part of it?
Yep.
Righteous.
Yeah. So you're working with an organization that is trying to change the governance models from, or kind of bridge more experimental pods, as you're calling them, which are kind of trying to see new ways of doing it, with the traditional kind of setup of a governance structure.
Yeah,
So, like,
well, so
something
so
in between of those two.
yeah, so I work in a big IT company, and I work on the innovation and on the sales competitiveness team. And so one of our customers is the governance team. And I've brought in LS to this innovation and sales competitiveness team the last, 6 months or so. And we do our own kind of workshops, like our own kind of internal development. And we use LS ourselves. And now we're starting to acquire customers, right? Like internal ones. And the governance team is one of those. And they bring their problems, which is, in this case, they work with our clients and they do traditional governance with our clients, like traditional IT governance, et cetera. But now they're being challenged to do digital governance, agile governance, governance that is much more dynamic. The requirements you have for digital governance, digital transformation driven governance, et cetera, are just very different than you have for traditional sort of, let's say, legacy IT governance. Does that make sense or not?
So it's basically, am I muted? Okay. So is it in a way that they're used to a way of working, and now they're kind of being challenged to try out more dynamic and explorative ways of governance with their clients?
Or they're going to be. And of course, a lot of these aren't sort of packaged, right? You can't go to a website and get, these off the shelf, right? So they're going to have to go through a
Let me
discovery
download
process.
your polycentric governance model.
Yeah, exactly. Which is different, not just for each client, but for different groups within the same client who maybe don't even work together themselves, or else if they did, you might not need a governance team, right? So it's a extremely real, kind of dynamic. And the problem is in general, it gets resolved in a more traditionally hierarchical way, which, let's say, whatever the limitations were in legacy, people accepted. But in this new dynamic digital agile environment, those approaches for governance just don't have a place for obvious reasons, because the digital agile teams the clients using are adapting on a pretty regular basis to their clients, internal and external, and adjusting. And the governance team has to figure out a way. not just to coexist with that, but to be that governance layer to, so that people don't go off the rails, or you could sense that, and provide that feedback, back and forth between management and the teams themselves. Does that make sense or not? Did I lose you guys already?
I think I get what you're talking about. So there's it sounds like you're in the midst of what's a pretty big transition. So between, I think I heard you describe governance sort of as compliance to governance as genuine. How do we make decisions? How do we wield influence
That's right.
about process in context, in a much more dynamic context?
That's right. That's right. Because so what it really boils down to is that the prior leadership, when things were far more rigid and fixed, could have much more of that command control hierarchical model, because that's what people were doing, right? Like that was the distribution value of what they were doing, which of course had limited distribution value. But as the client is moving to a much higher order distribution value to their clients, i.e. using agile, using digital transformation, being digital transformation, so to speak, like in the projects you do, the work you do, our governance team that is contracted by the client, of course, has to, blend with that, but then at the same time, factor in those components of governance, right? Like compliance, think of things as, a team might want to do a bunch of stuff with data, but they have some part of the organization that is engaged with GDPR. So they have some constraints there, right? So they have to they'd have to then, do the scalpel on that one versus maybe another one that they don't have to do, or have them both coexist. So there'll be a lot of that type of nuance, if that makes sense. Whereas today, the answer I think most of you would recognize would be let's have 48 committees and grind you into mush to stop having you do the wrong things with GDPR, which, is effective because then you shut down people's brains from doing anything except what they were doing before. But that's of course not what the customer wants. And more importantly, that's not what their customer wants.
Yeah, the risk is eliminated, but so is the opportunity in the risky
That's
space
right.
as well.
That's right. That's right. Because there is discovery out there, right? There is this sort of dynamic where, you get, you want it. The example being, we do business across the Americas, but also in Europe. And so there's certain projects we might do in Brazil or Argentina that become very, they're almost like super world-class MVP pilots that we get a huge amount of learning. And then of course that just dies, right? It doesn't see its light in the European project or the North American project or whatever, because we just say, oh, they do things that don't fit compliance X. And so we don't really get to navigate that. Does that make sense?
I think I'm getting the shape of it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So we're trying to sort of enable and activate sort of a innovation in the governance space, for teams that are basically where governance is their service, like their
That's right.
expertise in governance is the service that they're offering the client.
And what we're trying to do is use LS with them, for a period of however many months, and then ultimately make them the same way as I assume all of us discovered and became whatever level 2 mature 3, if we're lucky, kind of experts, whatever that means at this, help them become LS providers downstream, and then away they go, right? That's our goal, is to enable them, not to fix this for them, but to enable them to do that self-discovery of both LS, but also of how they can start to solve this problem to begin with themselves. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah. So they've got the prototyping, the sort of solution space that they want to offer the product in their own context. Okay.
That's right.
And when we think about this session that you're wanting to host, right, that has these goals of activating the innovation itself, but also this activation of individual participation within that
Yep.
innovation context.
Yep.
Who is, tell me a little bit more about the participants.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to get into that. So the participants are smart people. Like, these are experienced people. I mean, I think at most there's 20% that have less than 10 years professional experience. So I would say the majority are 10 to 20 years professional experience with, the IT, professional services, real deal stuff. And then a handful at the leadership level are 20 to 30 years. So there's a very rich team. So that's why we can't do the LS intro, as I like to call it, like the high school version, right? Like, let's all figure out what our favorite color is and do 1, 2 for all. Like, we can't do that, right? Like, they're just not, however good of a technique that is, which it actually is a pretty good technique. People who are up that sort of professional curve tend to feel insulted by those things. I'm not saying that's right, but it's just how it goes down. And so we need to have a set of workshops, and we're not limited, just so you know, there's no limitation here, because we work very in a healthy way. So we don't have to like solve it all in one workshop. We can it'll literally be a series, likely a bunch of Mondays or Wednesdays or whatever, and it'll go on for at least a month and maybe 2 months. So we do have a long a runway we can create for this. We're really good about that in the company. We don't try to like stupidly fix things in a 2-hour workshop, because it doesn't work anyway. So you don't have to worry about like smashing it all in. It can be really incremental. So does that make sense? Does that answer your question about kind of who they are?
Yeah, I guess I also have a
Go.
question about like how big is this are these settings? So we have multiple.
Yeah.
We have the opportunity for a series of engagements. How big?
Sure.
How many people in total are we talking about that you would expect?
Yeah,
for
so
any
the
individual
governance
engagement?
team is about 15 people, right? That's our team internally that we have as a service, right? So that, like I said, we don't do this team doesn't do internal governance at all. Like, that's not their mission. This is a services team with its own revenue, its own sort of offerings to the customer, et cetera. And then they basically attach on to other services that we have as a company, or to big deals. Like when we win an RFP, that comes with it. Obviously, that's part of our sort of special or sauce, is that we incorporate that into it. And everyone promises that, and then they do it for 2 months and leave. We have this baked into your program for 2-4 years, whatever the contract is. So it works well. I mean, like, governance 1.0 works really well, and they know they want to do, I'm making up these numbers, 1, 2, 3.0, but I think you know what I mean. They want to do 2.0. They want to make it more innovation centric, more agile centric, with more consultative, facilitative driven sort of governance, basically more proactive governance, if you really want to be honest about it. It's not this sort of firefighter governance. I show up because I got a call or because we see the smoke. We're proactively discovering likely paths where the governance is looking to help the business evolve itself, It is because a client is very comfortable basically blowing up their old school program management organization. Like, they're basically already doing it. And so they're very comfortable being agile. So they're at least at the tactical level. So they ultimately want the governance team or something like that to really be that new organization. And so that's a lot of, so it's got all the right ingredients. Let's put it that way. It's got the politics behind it. Right? Yeah, it is. I mean, it's rare that you get a client who kind of like it all clicks, but now, like the way the real world works, well, now you got to step up, right? Everyone complains about the client doesn't want to do this, the leader is bad, this. Well, we don't have that problem now. It's all on the team to have to deliver. To actually deliver this, and they're very understanding. They understand that this isn't something you buy off the shelf at at a grocery store or something like that. I mean, this is
Okay,
something
so
you have to develop. So
I'd
anyways,
like to move to get us towards
Okay.
a concrete proposal.
sure.
So
No,
if,
do you
so it
still need
sounds
this
like
up on the screen or no? Or
No,
can I
no.
take this off? Okay,
What's up,
I'll
David?
stop this, sure.
Oh.
Oh, are you there, David?
You're on mute.
Oh, you're on mute, Dave. Yeah, I know. I hate it when I have like 8 things and I gotta and the mute doesn't work.
It's going in and out slowly while the ball goes around.
Exactly.
Yeah, I had a couple questions about the context too. Is the genesis of the initiative to provide an innovative compliance service, is that coming from a crisis or
No.
a loss? It's coming from, is it forward leaning?
Yeah, it's forward leaning. The person in charge of it, Betty, is a phenomenal person. I'm trying when she's available, because she's that kind of person, to drag her into these LS, LS groups outside of what I'm running with my boss. My boss is, who's very senior, is all in on this. Like, he's kind of gone really in the deep end, which is great. And so it's completely exploratory. It's you basically use her team for whatever, an hour a week, and as development clay, and then she has 2 or 3 others, nothing to do with us, that she's doing like that too. And then through all that, they're looking to sort of discover, their goal is by the end of Q1 to kind of come out with okay, this is what we now want to emphasize. And, boom, this is what we're going to go do. And then proactively use this first customer, this big customer, and then existing customers. She has another maybe 20, and then start rolling this service into them, appropriately, proportionally. And that's the goal this year, basically.
Well, that's going to be the second half of my question really is, are the clients aware that this is going on right now?
Yeah, well, the big client is absolutely aware. Their expectation is that she and her team are going to bring some very dynamic and innovative approaches, because basically, like I said, they did what good normal companies are doing now, which is they got a lot of agile pods out there, right? And they're executing them, and they're really doing it, they're not screwing it up. And then they didn't buy into the all-in safe, 15 layers, command control safe, I call it, model, because they obviously realized they couldn't eat that well. And they left basically the vestige of the prior IT leadership organization governance model, and that was really there to get all those pods in. But now, once all that's in, now they got to say, all right, well, we now need a new way to manage that. It's a new operating model, basically. And she has a lot of credibility, and our team has a lot of credibility because we've done a lot of good stuff there. So now they've said, we're going to really go down this path with you, and if it's sufficient, then it's all yours. And then that's her big kind of kahuna for the year, is that big account, because that's in and of itself almost becomes its own super RFP, if that makes any sense, right? Because it's got its own legs, because you're really reconstructing an IT leadership model, which will give us a big benefit in the market, because obviously big competitors have been doing it and trying to do it in their various forms, and ours is much more tactical. And that's why a lot of our customers, I think, like us, is that we're not trying to upsell the first meeting a $10 million deal. It's more of oh, you got this problem, boom, let's try to fix it, and then we build from there. So that benefits us. But the flip side is that sort of goes small once a client sort of says, boom, you have all my draft choices now. Then it's there's that, no, I don't do that. I just look for little free agents that are these perfect little transfers. I'm mixing sports now.
No. We're looking for the, no. You've got the process. So I think if I can.
One last question is,
sure.
Are there any risk or impediments or obstacles that you can see that are in the context?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm being really honest, I think the risk is that the leadership of the governance will, because they do have their own sort of just strength of personality, they will jump and do, and they can. I mean, they can pull it off. Their team will follow. And I think developing them as less followers and more, call them junior leaders. I mean, I hate all the terms, but you know what I mean? Like moving them out of that closed position of, go this way, go that way, because, like the swarming, right? And moving them into the swarm leader is, I think, to me, that's the big, like when I'm thinking about a big picture, that's the biggest thing, right? Like it's not you're going to go to the meeting, it's going to go wrong next week, blah, blah, blah. Like these are good people who figure out how to survive and thrive in those environments. It's getting them out of their comfort zone, and the leadership's comfortable with them doing it. It's not like there's an oppressive environment. It's just, they
Human
have to get
development.
the umph, right? Like that umph phase. And it's one of the reasons I think LS has a good shot with them, because it can allow them to sort of carve their own paths in this. Some people are, agile superstars. Some people are digital, all the different variations of what that can mean. Superstars. Some people are risky people, risks people, they got all the sort of ingredients. But the missing thing is they don't necessarily have the facilitation. This sounds stupid, but I'm going to merge this together, like stratagem, if that makes any sense, like where they feel strong enough as a facilitator that it's like, let's go take this joint risk together in a facilitation setting. Right now, if that happened, it would be one of those 3-4 leaders of the whole group that would do that. And that means they run the big risk of not being scalable. Like basically they run the risk of getting too much work because this thing works. And then they have that issue where the backlog then piles up, and then the client's like been excited. And after 3 months, they're like, well, I appreciate you basically guiding us, but we're going to go with someone else now because you can't show up. Right. So I think I'd be honest, I think that's the real risk that they have. As like big picture, they don't have the risk of there's not enough people, not enough smart people, not enough open thinking people. It's people are going to have to really dig down and be comfortable, stepping up basically, which these people have in their own SME domain. So it's not like they don't know how to do that. This is different though.
Yep.
You're really
This is a human development challenge, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks. That's good.
Yeah, sure.
So,
Any other questions or anything, or? And hopefully this was good. I mean, I didn't want to hijack this or anything. I just wanted to.
no,
hopefully
it's a big thing.
And we don't
I
have to
think-
solve it all today or anything like that. I mean, I can go back. If you give me a list of questions, I can go back. My goal was to bring some of the people, but it was just timing wise, but I can start bringing them too. And, away we go.
I think if I can simplify it into like the first baby step that I think you have, that I think you're going for, is how do you introduce liberating structures to this group of people, right?
Yep.
In a way in which they recognize the validity and value that sort of rises to their level in a sort of nuanced way. I think that's worthy. And if I think about the first hour of a go for that, I think we can definitely put some work together.
Sure.
So Aaron, I'll ask you to mute and jump off the camera. And
yes, sir.
sort of get to work.
Okay. All right. And then are we going to do like what you're going to do, like wise crowds, things like that? Or
Yeah, we're going to go through wise crowds. We're going to come up with some proposal, and then you'll come back and tell us what you thought about.
Cool. So will you just in the chat, and I'll check the chat every, like, how long are you planning? Like 10 minutes?
No. You stay here, but you turn off.
Okay, you want me to listen?
And you mute yourself.
Okay.
So
okay. I didn't know how extreme of a wise crowd you wanted me to do.
No.
Okay.
Not that extreme. So just go ahead and mute yourself, and we'll get to work, man. So our invitation, we want to try and be as concrete as we can for Aaron. So when you hear this design brief, what are the structures that come to mind for this challenge of introducing liberating structures to quite smart people with a lot of experience? If we think about that goal, what are the structures that you think, yeah, these could be good things for that to introduce them to liberating structures? And then we'll try and string those together, perhaps into a more cohesive experience. And Elvin, everybody, if you just don't mute yourself. Right? We want to make this thing live.
I'm wondering, is this something that we want to take a few minutes to kind of reflect on and then bring forward, or just
I love the proposal. Go for it. Yeah, let's do that. We can take a minute and gather our own thoughts.
Should we just give a little bit more time or something? Yeah, okay.
Does anybody want more time, or?
I'm good.
Cool, man. Throw us
Yeah,
what you got.
okay. Well, I am not entirely acquainted with the liberating structure, but I think some of the main thing about the one that I'm thinking about, which is Panarchy, is kind of thinking about micro and macro challenges to these adaptations within the team that is in place. So yes, it has to do a little bit with like these small ecocycles happening across the levels of the Panarchy, but maybe framing it in such a way about like either opportunities or challenges with the clients, or the ways of working, or existing approaches, and what has to be done to kind of change them, could be a way to maybe start scouting for, what do these people kind of need to take a look at to revisit and reshape.
Awesome. Anybody else? What else comes to mind? And maybe it's also good to Angel, to unpack Panarchy while we're here, because we dropped Panarchy, but it's a big one. So can you give to the best of your understanding, can you give us some description of Panarchy?
Yeah, so to how I've understood it, Panarchy is kind of trying to work with a multi-scale system where you have a kind of like a cycle of things that are emerging and being going through creative destruction and kind of coming up again. So things that are dying off and things that are coming up again in different scales of a system. So for instance, in the micro scale, you could think about the ways of working individually. In the micro scale, you can think about the way that the team interacts. In the medium, big scale, you could think about like maybe processes within an organization, and that kind of keeps on scaling. So you use this big picture to kind of see when things kind of try to cross from one level to the other, what challenges can be in the way yeah, like spreading that innovation or new ways of doing in the system that you're kind of working with.
Cool. Yeah. And I would say, yeah, to build on that, for sure, multi-scalar. So we're working up the nested holons. So what's the context for this context, right? What's the context for that context? What's the context that this context finds itself in, so on and so forth. Just working up, I think, the 9 scales, 9 scales is the intention. And working through the ecocycle in each one of these scales to sort of explore and come to understand it.
I think you're going to end up there, but you probably don't want to start there because it's complex to the point where it'll be difficult for things to structure themselves. Maybe practicing Ecocycle on a few different things, especially on the change itself. The development, articulating the purpose is a good idea to start with. The team knows what are the characteristics that will make us know that we're going in the right direction. And to, you know, if you have the ability to agree on an outcome, and I think we kind of got that from Aaron. We got a definition of the outcome. So if the team is on board with that, then the great thing about liberating structures would be the 2 problems that we identified, the 2 impediments, scaling and, you know, the ability to have the depth of skill and talent to make these techniques work. Those things work perfectly together. So practice, 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 and used a lot of different structures, but think in terms of a good set of maturity, I would say, would be getting to the point where you understand Ecocycle and you're able to use that to plot your way forward. The scaling part of it seems to me like if you've got a room full of smart people, then everybody needs to practice. And practicing to come up with phases of progress is a good way to go. And it seems like the context is pretty well set for that. Also thinking at some point about bringing clients into the mix, bringing them into the process where they might be able to see you whispering aloud about how you're developing the process, and you might be able to get some input from the clients as well as it's going along. Even if what you're getting from the clients is, I don't understand. And I think you also need to be mindful of the thing called the learning dip, where when you get people to start changing, at first they could be extremely enthusiastic and realize, gee, this is really fun. But when it gets hard, they might still want to revert to the way they did it before because they know the outcome of that. They know the result. They know how hard it is. And if you do X, then Y will come out. And so that needs to be something that you're also thinking about. And then I think also it's always worthwhile thinking in terms of Knotworking too, like where is the situation? Is it a simple situation or is it a complicated situation where you know you really can manage it? The good thing about Panarchy is that you can kind of say assign states to different levels of the multi-layered ecocycle or the multi-patterned ecocycle or the interwoven ecocycle, and you can start to think about how those things fit together. I personally like the strategy Knotworking, and as a group, it shows real respect to the middle leaders who are really important to making change successful and building that scale. It shows real respect to them to let them realize all these parameters on their own. And liberating structures can help people reach the consensus without it coming from charismatic leaders. So, you know, setting up the context where that evolution can happen is likely to get a longer term capability that can scale, and a community that can stay truer to the values and the purpose that you've started out with. So abstract the principles, come up with new methods, practice those methods, and keep resisting the temptation to lead.
I like this. Like, yeah. So I think so. There's a lot of good stuff in here. I mean, I think can see that we're sort of cohering around some of the more complex structures, which on one hand seems to make sense if we have like show them the big guns, so to speak, and give them a sense for what these things can do, and then perhaps use that to gain buy-in, to lean into, all right, simplify and simplify. And obviously the bigger structures will have the smaller structures sort of nested into them as well. I would though like to unpack strategy not working, which is kind of yeah, that's a thing. So David, help me out here. So when we say strategy not working, what we're referring to is the sort of emerging adaptive strategy practice that is in the liberating structures community. Not working like not working, like to tie knots. It's based on 6 questions. Let me drop the visual in the doc as well. And actually, it probably makes more sense to share screen. I'm going to do the big visual, which is going to be a little Titanic, but we'll deal. Go. So not working starts off with 6 questions, like I said, and those questions you can explore in different layers of detail, depending on the needs of your context. Let me get this shared screen going. Cool. So can you guys see the visual?
Mm-hmm.
So this is detailed. So I'll both apologize and try and give the highest level overview. So the first question is, what's the fundamental justification for the existence of the work? So as David mentioned, purpose. The second question is around context. What's happening around us that demands creative change? Third is challenge. What paradoxical challenges must we face to make progress? And 4 is baseline. Where are we starting honestly? Coming to 5, given our purpose, what seems possible now? And 6, action and evaluation. How are we acting our way towards the future, evaluating what is possible as we go? So using these 6 questions as your sort of blueprint for this larger conversation. And what you'll notice in the small print is that each one of these questions has this sort of laundry list of different suggestions for different structures you could use to expand on this question in detail. So structures that are helpful to explore these questions.
I think it's important, although you use the numbers and they put the numbers on here, you don't have to go. You could treat that as an address rather than as an order. So, you might, and the fun thing with liberating structures is that you could start with your ambition and realize while you're doing 2510 or 9 whys or something like that, realize that you can't do it because you don't know your purpose. So you have an ambition without a purpose doesn't make so much sense. When you get to that point, you can say, oh, we need to go back to number 1. Let's go back over there and let's try another structure. And in that way, you keep finding, is this structure getting us where we need to go? We're ready for the next step. No, we're not. We need to go back. And the good thing about that is that you learn how to diagnose your situation. And I think, if you got a room full of smart and open-minded people, and there's not so much of a risk in terms of experimenting with new stuff, then that's a pretty brilliant way to advance, because you move around, you repeat things, you see if the same thing comes out again. There's just enough trust in the process that it just delivers good results every time.
Yeah, so thanks, David, for adding the non-linear aspect of this. So while it looks linear, it's not. And to come back to this idea of scale, so to refer to this scale also in a different context, if you think about using a full structure, for example, using 9 whys to help establish purpose. You could look at that as like the highest resolution version of your purpose that you might want to do. Maybe that is exactly what you need, but that could be overkill for your first pass. Maybe you just want to give yourself a low enough resolution, and that could be just using 1, 2 for all to answer the question, what's the fundamental justification of our work? Let's establish a basic purpose, and then let's just keep going, right?
And then so you could do the same thing with the challenge, like the paradoxical challenge. If you've got a wicked question to start with, and you're right in that step, you know, you're ready to start doing that with wicked questions, you can go part way. And then again, I think you're exactly right, Jeremy. The resolution is adjustable to where you want to be, where you think you need to be at that point, and the evolution of the group's awareness.
So what I might say is that 1, 2 for all throughout this whole pattern. I mean, you're going to be 90 minutes deep, but then you're sort of showing the resilience of 1, 2 for all, number one, which is, as I think everybody knows, that's like the bread and butter. And you're also establishing this pattern of inquiry as a method, so to speak, about how to approach your exploration, how to figure this stuff out, so to speak. So that's one particular possibility. I think that unpacks and introduces strategy knotworking, hopefully in a way that is digestible. I think I would also like to make the case for agreement certainty matrix. I think in this context, again, that could be a particularly useful pattern to, given the type of challenges that are going to be before the end users of this session, right? These are going to be guys think about governance, right? Governance is influence and decision making. How do we do that? And that's going to have some impact on what type of context are we in. So let me add the visual. Does anybody?
That's a great suggestion, and it also works really well when you start to deliver the service to clients, because it's a great way of getting a common shared picture of what is certain and what is less certain, what looks easy and what looks difficult. It's really a good consensus building exercise.
Totally. Somebody just shared a beautiful agreement certainty matrix. I've got so many of them. I really saw this one. I was like, that is the best one by far. So it's somewhere in there. Can somebody unpack it while I'm busy digging in to find this visual?
I don't think I'm familiar enough with that one. Haven't read it through, or not even practiced it, actually.
So I can add this one because that's just right here. Oh, I added a whole bunch of shit. That's not good. Hardly useful. Oops. So the agreement certainty matrix is kind of it uses the Stacy matrix as opposed to the Cynefin sense making framework. So I guess the share screen is the best way. We definitely need to have this because explaining it is not going to make it clear without the visual, I think. So agreement certainty matrix. So like I said, it uses the Stacy matrix, so if your agreement about the problem is high and low on the vertical axis, and your certainty about the solution, again, high degree of certainty, low degree of certainty. So if you take whatever situation you're dealing with and you just map it, do we agree about what the problem is? Is there agreement about what the problem is? And are we certain about what what the solution is going to be. If you take those two data points and you plot it somewhere on here, you either find out that it is in fact a simple problem. You probably don't need to plot simple problems. Probably very few simple problems are going to find its way onto your chart because you're probably just going to solve them, right? You're going to also identify that there are problems or challenges that are complicated. They have a lot of moving parts, but expertise is a good strategy to deal with this stuff. Get the right, smartest people in the room, enough of them, and the problem will dissolve. And then there's this huge category in the mid space, which is complex problems. Complex problems have a different recipe of resolution. Just like simple problems, you just execute the best practice. Complicated problems, you do your analysis and then you figure out what the good practice is and you do it. Complex problems have this quality of, as you can see, there are several valid ways to proceed, but outcomes are not predictable in detail. So this gives you a blueprint of actually how are we going to approach this complex process. You can tell that you're going to have to do things fundamentally differently to approach a complex process than you will with a complicated process. And that's why I say this is sort of an alternative to the Cynefin sense making framework there, in that I think this makes the domains, the explaining the domains a little bit simpler, but the information behind the Cynefin sense making framework about what they mean, and especially the trifecta around how to deal with it. So in Cynefin terms, complex, you want to probe, sense, and respond. Right? You want to run small safe to fail tests that help reveal the context in greater resolution as you're trying stuff out. Theory U would also say, to understand a system, to understand a system, you have to change it, and to change it, you have to make it sense itself. So you want to try something out and then reflect on how that worked, and then you're coming to a deeper understanding about, oh, this is the nature of the context that we're in. But agreement certainty matrix is a really good tool to give to these guys because it can help them come to the conclusion that, oh shit, these challenges that we are finding clients in used to be in this complicated domain, but there's much more stuff in this complex domain, which may require a different, sort of building the obviousness of why you're going to engage in doing things differently.
Yeah, figuring out the granularity of what can be resolved from complex to simple or complex to complicated. If you get the granularity right and you get practiced at that, that is a professional service. If you can bring the group along with that, then your facilitation skills will be worth buying.
I'm wondering if, in terms of the scalability of this, because it sounds like it can be adapted, right, for the own group to kind of figure out, okay, this is like our portfolio of stuff, but then also when working with the client, you can be like, okay, what sub problems or network problems are we working? So this can be something that might be built on together also with them to help that sense making along the way when kind of like trying to diagnose or move forward with actions.
Totally. No, absolutely.
And I like the idea that, if you move something in the complex domain, everybody agrees it would be a good outcome, but people don't agree that you can do it. So it's up high on the left. And then you've got to do the safe to fail idea that you mentioned. I think that's a very useful metaphor, that every time you do something that's safe to fail, you're bringing things down toward the center. I mean, down toward the lower left corner of the graph.
So I can also say, you're right, there's good practice in introducing this tool. You might get exceptional value for money for your initial goal of why we want to invest more time and energy of liberating structures, but also in offering tools that are maybe extremely relevant to the business at hand. So both of these things seem quite relevant. And if I think about going back to the Ecocycle and or strategy not working, I feel like there's an opportunity space in particular of smashing these two things together. It's clearly too long of a, perhaps too long of an exercise to think about both the agreement certainty matrix, the Ecocycle, and strategy not working. But I feel like at the intersection of these three things, like, yeah, now we're really offering very powerful tools that I would imagine should reveal themselves as having high degrees of utility, and also have a lot of depth that can be continuously unpacked sort of as you go along.
Yeah, the experience and the practice that you would get from doing any combination of those, it's either going to make stew or soup or something that is, nutritionally valuable for your group. There's no loss in taking that approach. And I like the idea of 1, 2, 4 all interspersed liberally, because keeping in mind that goal of getting middle leaders to step up, and become capable of driving things forward on their own, it's really important that you keep that ability to communicate concisely in short snippets, and that you're building consensus through that process of actually talking to other people authentically. And you're going to get better at doing that as you practice it. So I like your idea of using 1, 2, 4 all a lot.
Yeah, and what the added upside of 1, 2, 4 all as well is, like, nobody's ever seen a 1, 2, 4 all and said, oh no, I can't do that, right? If anything, people tend to dismiss it as simplistic, because it is so simple, right? Simple but not simplistic.
Yeah, there's general amazement at how well it works.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, so yeah.
And save Panarchy until you need it. At some point, your group might go, you know what? We got multiple ecocycles. And someone will go, yeah, there's a name for that. But if you try to start with it, it's like, well, why do we have all these levels?
Yeah, I don't know though. There's something about it that this context as well, that it might help make things very tangible, because this could be one of the problems that I think that I would imagine they're facing, right? So on the content side around governance, like, Aaron, if you're not, you should definitely be paying attention to what's happening in the blockchain Web3 space, because there's just a huge amount of, like, exploration and active innovation in the governance space that a lot of these decentralized autonomous organizations are doing. But like, polycentric governance, this lots of different centers, right, at lots of different scales, could make explicit the fact that, oh, for this scale, we need different tools to help manage influence and decision making, versus at the grand cosmic scale that is the entire organization. And making that explicit could actually really help clarify things for these guys and go, yeah, actually, I'm looking at it because I'm accustomed to looking at it from this perspective, but way down here, oh, that's why this big heavy tool I'm using doesn't make sense for these guys. That's too large for them to pick up and effectively heft. So I think there's something to be made for that as well. Whether it's appropriate for an opening salvo, I mean, there is a constraint for time, because Panarchy, just to get started, you're talking 2 hours to do it any degree of justice. Like, you might be able to introduce the concept, do a couple ecocycles, but Panarchy just takes a long while by virtue of the multi-scalar facet.
well, I think the same is true of strategy not working. These things benefit from slow thinking. And it's like, if you try to go too fast, then it may hold together, it may not. You don't get
it sounds in a way that the space that Aaron is kind of working in affords for that. in a sense, because he was mentioning, this could be like a slow work once a week, or I don't know, however long of a period this can be. So maybe it is something it can be that North Star, either the Knotworking or Panarchy or whatever it is. And then just like have that as the introduction, that sketch that we want to get to, and then kind of build up on it bit by bit. So time, at least it's not it doesn't seem necessarily to be like one of the bigger constraints.
Sure. But I mean, for any individual session, right, you want to offer an increment of usable value to these guys, so that at the end of this hour session, that they go, yeah, we got something I can use that I might be able to instantly apply. Because the tighter that coupling from introduction to the ability to get to application, the more development capacity. And if I think about that as a primary constraint for this session, I would say I would for sure land on agreement certainty matrix as probably the first thing I would want to give them, right? Just to make sense of, okay, the challenges that we're looking at fall more in this domain. So we're going to be exploring more tools that are going to help us in this domain of complex challenges, complex governance rather than big complicated governance.
Now, the point you make about delivering value in every encounter also reminds me, it's not really a liberating structure, but do a rosethorn bud or a roadie at the end of everything, so that you get that attention to process. Like, we're not making a new recipe, we're making a new way to cook. And we're going to improvise because we're good at sense making and we're good at sensing the context. I think that's like a major change to most organizations who are like, let's write a new manual. That's not what you're trying to do. But just by introducing that step, you're showing everybody that nobody's making the rules here. We're all agreeing on what's working and what isn't working.
I'm wondering, this kind of sounded like the so what now, the what so what now. How do these two, what you just mentioned, differ from that in terms of debriefing? Sorry.
Yeah. So I think you're talking about the similar things, right? What you're trying to do is enable sort of metacognitive reflection about what we've just explored and experienced together. And so I think correct me if I'm wrong, David, but I get the sense that what you want is to offer some lightweight way of activating that reflection, to sort of make it tangible. And what so what now what is the pattern is great, number one, but if I think about the pattern, the tool that is the structure takes a good bit of while. So again, coming back to this time constraint, what so what now what, it could be a particularly valid bolt-on. If I have an extra half hour, doing an agreement certainty matrix with a what so what now what would be like, bam, all right, we're bringing some heat.
You can do that. You can do the so what. You can do that in chat too. I mean, that can be a super fast one. I also like 15% for that, because it's like, what doesn't depend on anyone else that you're going to do as a result of what we talked about today. And that gives everyone something to own,
Killer. So I think opening salvo, it sounds like we're sort of gravitating towards a string, the surrounding agreement certainty matrix with some in some shortened, condensed version of what so what now what as a reflection at the end, with liberal doses of 1, 2 for all sprinkled around, and finding your earliest opportunity to introduce the Ecocycle at your next venture, perhaps scaling into Panarchy. So
there you go.
I think that's our good enough for now, safe enough to try. That's what we get in a half hour, so to speak, trying to deal with these help requests keep getting bigger and bigger, man. Woo. We were trying to design meetings. We're talking about innovation pipelines and solutions, and man. So Aaron, I mean, if you're still here with us, come back
Of
in
course,
and
of course.
give us the
That
game.
was
What did,
that was
what did you take?
awesome. So it's funny because I was on when we did our breakouts with each other at the beginning. So when I was with Elvin, I mentioned to him the one I really want to really kind of dig into to become really comfortable sort of deploying is the agreement and certainty matrix. So that was great that, you sort of, ultimately figured out that was one that was really powerful. And overall, this was fantastic. I mean, just, the amount of sort of dynamic conversation on this was great. And just sort of, as you guys were sort of making your eggplant sausage, whatever appropriate food types you eat, and then I did like the strategy not working. So one of the things I've been doing a lot of with the team itself, this kind of core group that we've been spending 3-4 months doing LS, pretty aggressively, like between twice a week, and it's like, it's like no BS. Like, I build invitation. I kind of go from you guys give me the backlog of some problems, or I just do like a random shock session. I kind of call it like shock therapy, where I'll just take somebody's challenge and I'll just do a 9 whys with them, like publicly within the tight group, right? And we're all comfortable. And then what I found is doing that a few times, 3-4 different people in the group, this core, like 6-8 people, they've had breakthroughs. Like LS finally, like we all get that moment where LS clicks, right? And you could do it, you join meetings, you do it for 3-4 months, and then and you get the tools, but it doesn't click, like, oh, wow, this is something I have to do now. And for the most part, each of those people, I did that sort of facilitation. That's sort of what happened. And I assume those of us are here, probably here for those reasons too. So the only thing I would probably adjust is throw in some 9 whys into the 1, 2, 4 all, because I found that really smart, really domain strong people in at least the broad technology space, because it's so wide in breadth, sometimes get lost like in the weeds. And the 9 whys, kind of what I've discovered, drags them out in a way that is really sort of self-reflecting. Like they don't feel like, I've been made dumb or, sort of embarrassed or whatever. They sort of are like, yeah, that makes sense. Of course, like they kind of get that discovery moment. And we've done the Ecocycle a couple times in the group, more introductory. But at least getting people comfortable. So what I've done with the group, and this was sort of, I made this up. There was no right answer here. I just had to sort of say, all right, it was a group. I kind of spent about the first month just playing with the simple tools with them, just getting them really comfortable, trying to get them to read, trying to get them to look at, I would introduce a tool, and there's a couple people on YouTube who have these really short, kind of videos. There's an Indian guy, I forgot his name. He's fantastic. He does like a 3-minute, 4-minute on the individual structure and just talks it right through. And so it's kind of like I've done this reinforcing with these very, very simple structures. And then at a certain point, about a month and a half in, I said, all right, now we're going to go, right? And we sort of start stringing them together, and then everyone starts tripping over each other, which is good. And then we kind of work our way through that. And now we're at this stage where they can do all the simple ones. They're gaining, it's a confidence issue I've discovered, to just take the risk to start doing the strings. And then I'm trying to introduce some of the more intermediate advanced ones, because that's where our problems really are, right? Like I knew we weren't going to solve everything with the simple structures. It wasn't that easy. If it was that easy, everyone would do it anyways. It was, we had to get into things like the agreement matrix. We had to get into these sort of, this next stage. So so that's just sort of my take on everything you guys said, which is fantastic. I like the string. The way I kind of see it is, I try to sort of do something that would normally take, let's say 2 hours. I try to break that up into like 3 sessions, actually. One thing that's interesting about this I've sort of discovered, which I don't know if anyone has done anything on this, is that when you don't know each other and you do LS, you can do a lot more. Like you kind of just, there's like a trust layer there with just doing a lot of structures. When you start knowing each other and basically having this, like, I'd call it like, professional debt or something. Like we have this background with each other. Jeremy, my debt answer to everything. Like, so that's a thing. Maybe there's a book in that. I've kind of attached the concept of technical debt to like every other aspect of your life, like your kitchen debt, your like living room debt, like all this crap we have around us all the time, your headphone debt, because you've got like 9 headphones, but you haven't gotten rid of them, even though you only wear the one you like, and the rest are just in the closet and you hide it from your mom or whatever. And, it's just like, it's so there's like a professional debt out there that I found slows down the structures. And I think a lot of it has to do is that when you work together with people and you run into a little problem, you stop. It's sort of like a family thing almost. And when you're in a group together, like a dynamic, if I was stopping you in each stage of the whys, like at some point you'd be like, just Aaron, just trust it, just do it. Like you would just cut through it because we don't have enough tightness yet to be blunt, to be so codependent on each other. Right. And so what I'm trying to figure out is how to break some of the codependency, because I've noticed as we move into the deeper end of LS, we're going really slow. And so one of the things I've been thinking about is how to bring in sort of an external actor. So that's one of the reasons and I like your group a lot, actually, is maybe at some point one of you can come and just sort of like, you don't care who we are. Like I'm doing this invitation, like I'm leaving in an hour. Like that's fine. That's my thing. And just to make people get out of that comfort zone, because it's after 3 months working with them, every time, there's a challenge, they hang on a word, like, and it's just like, come on, man, just like the failure is amongst us and it's not a failure. It's your own weird sense of like, I don't understand this. Why am I doing it? So there is this dynamic I have to break in our own LS coaching team.
And I would encourage, in response to that, I would encourage tempo. Like, so
that's good.
So I think in my experience of what the type of challenge that you're talking about, it's when people sort of this emotional or this relational aspect has us say, oh no, we want to get out of the structure and we need to have a discussion about this thing, right? And whereas the exact opposite is actually your best case, like
and I know that
structure, right? Stick to the structure and actually condense the conversations, right? So especially when it comes to like 1, 2, 4 all, I definitely know everyone loves to complain about 1, 2, 4 all, that the time boxes are too tight, and that's by design. That's not accidental.
Exactly. So one thing I've discovered is our group, and maybe this is just the cost of starting off with the easier structures. And maybe there's just no right answer ever, right? Like I had to make a call, and my call was, I could do my neighbor could knock on the door right now and say, can you do a string of easy liberating structures? Not that he knows what it is, but and I could just go out the door and do it right now. Right. And so I felt really comfortable doing that. They really liked it, and they're very comfortable with the constraints in it. That's something that's a really good novelty about them as a group. And I think because there's a lot of trust there, they know they're going to get, if something doesn't fit, they know they're going to get a recycle, right? Like there's going to be a constant, because it's the group. We meet a couple times a week at least. And but as we move into the deeper end, where the questions are denser, and what I've sort of discovered about LS is that when you get to these harder challenges, like the ones that you guys worked through today, which was amazing, by the way, there is this sort of, you have to pull it out like string cheese, right? Like you just can't be like, oh, and here's the structure, and that solves it. Next, it's you got to sort of, peel it out. And I think there's a challenge in that a lot of the easy structures kind of help you get to the point, but they don't necessarily help you pull out everything to feel confident enough that you can structure a clear purpose, right? And one thing I've emphasized with the group is the concept of clear purpose. They really love that, actually. Like we will, when we meet, we will not kick off a structure unless there's a clear purpose. Like we just won't. And I'll just sit there and be like, nope, I know we're burning our hour, but like, what's the clear purpose? And so they really like that rigor behind that. But what I found is that a lot of the easier tools by themselves, unstrung correctly, like in the strategy not working, are limited in pulling out all that string to create that clear purpose. And that's where a lot of times they'll be not frustrated, but afraid, I think would be the right answer, to jump in. Because the jump in feels like you're in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah.
And you don't know which way to go.
You're in liminality, right?
That's right.
You can get
That's
a piece
right.
of it, but it's not all clear. Thanks, Elvin.
Yeah.
We are running over.
Yep.
But yeah, so to give folks the confidence that, yes, that's why I think agreement certainty matrix is probably one of your better places to start, because that can make explicit this exactly what you're talking about of, hey, we're going for all of these things in the middle, we're not going to have easy answers and resolution. So you're just going to have to deal with, right?
Exactly.
You have to deal with all of that.
And for very professional delivery centric IT people, especially professional services, to be blunt, which I think some of us, if not all of us, have some background in at various points in our career. That feels, very backwards. It just does. I mean, and especially, and I think this is the key, the people with the least challenge have a product background, like a product development background, because there's a lot of failure there. Right.
There's
and
exploration
I think
by definition, right?
That's right. And the people, deliver to the SOW, deliver to the resource plan, deliver to the, the legacy, which is still true. It isn't like in the new world, oh, we don't deliver, it's like, no, you still have to do things like that work that people, have aligned to value. So there is this dichotomy in the challenge to still be rigorous and righteous to your commitments, but then carve off this little 10-20% of yourself for this more exploratory, and you might get an unfulfilling answer, but maybe that is the fulfillment, is that it's an unfulfilling answer, because that requires now to break it down into more into more granular dimensions to understand. Right? Exactly. And so that's a little bit of the human, it's not a huge one, but it's something I've noticed the last month, and maybe some of it had to do with the holidays, and the schedule's a little funky, but hopefully in January, February, we're kicking kind of back into full gear. And get some rhythms, and we have the customers now, right? So everyone's getting more serious about, like they're reading stuff in the Liberating Structures book, asking, like, I know they're getting real, because they're getting ready to be in front of our own internal customers, and they don't want to, screw up and stuff. So,
Look like a noob.
Yeah. So I really love, I think the strategy not working process might in some ways be almost like you have like microstructures, macrostructures, like maybe the macro structure that we like, it's sort of like the journey path that we might want to get to. And then we use, the agreement, certainty, we use all of, people seem to like Triz a lot. I don't know, I can't figure that one out, but whatever, they just seem to, no, because I think what it is they all have confidence. I think we all do, but in this case, they all have confidence up and down days around the exploration. So they're sort of breaking through those walls of fear of not knowing something, when of course you're paid, especially after 20 years, to know everything, which is ridiculous. And so they're going through a lot of that. As I like to say, we're doing a lot of sort of professional services therapy is what a lot of this is, actually. but anyways, I mean, I look at your doc and it's really great. And I mean, the conversation, guys, was phenomenal. I mean, it really was.
Well, this pattern itself, right? Wise crowds
Yeah.
and a design storyboard is probably also another useful pattern for these
Yeah.
guys going into it to help them, increase their strength in that sense of design chops. So
Yep. Yeah.
fortune
And so, if you don't mind, and I don't know if you want to turn off the recording now, if that's okay, we can talk a
oh
little
yeah, for sure.
differently.